James will be a tough act to follow, won't he?
Absolutely.
Did you bring your comedic treats with you today?
No, I'm just going to answer any questions you ask me.
Thank you so much. Let's start with the formative years. And as my grandmother would say, you were a little divil in school, weren't you?
Yes, I was. I was constantly outside the headmaster's office because I wouldn't stop talking. My mum used to say to me all the time around the dinner table, mouth meant to eat, not to talk too much. And so here we are now in a career where I talk.
And your parents moved from the Caribbean in the late 60s?
Yes, they're from Barbados.
Okay.
Anybody been to Barbados? No one? Oh, okay, great. Yeah, great island, very, very hot. And I think they came here because there were opportunities that maybe they didn't have in the Caribbean. And I know that, obviously, I was born here, so my guess was that they wanted more for their kids if they had them. Because at the time, the opportunities, well, they looked as though they were just paved with gold, so yeah.
You've described your dad as your first program controller. Can you explain that?
Without a shadow
Please.
of a doubt. I didn't realise it at the time, but my dad, who I honestly do believe at birth, his dad shoved a dictionary in his mouth. My dad was extremely articulate and extremely passionate as well. And any time he used to speak in church, everybody just used to stop and look and listen. And he was like that with singing as well. If he was, you know, I can remember us being at a wedding and he'd harmonise, but he'd harmonise loud so that you could hear him. And he was just such an orator. And I do think that's where I get that from.
What was your mum like in those early days?
Fire.
Right.
Yes. Maybe that's where I get my fiery side from. Probably a good reason why I'm on Smooth, so I can't be too fiery. But my mum was a very passionate speaker, but she didn't have the articulation that my dad had. Now, that didn't make her any less of a parent, but my dad would always win an argument without raising his voice, without going too tough. He'd let you speak, and then the words would just come out. He just had it. He just had it.
And what about school?
I wasn't always the best behaved at school. I can remember being in the language labs. Does anybody remember language labs here? Yeah, where we were supposed to be learning French. Répétez, je m'appelle Angèle, and I'd be pretending to be an American DJ. And I think that's where a lot of this also came in as well. Yeah, and just constantly talking, constantly getting in trouble, but hey ho.
James from LBC, you've done some cover work in LBC.
Yes.
And you got a phone call from a deputy principal in the middle of the gig.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
Wow. So one of the things that I've really prided myself on is, as well as doing music radio, I've also done speech. And I actually started in radio in HR. So I've done the whole thing. I went from HR to assistant producer to presenter. And after I had my children, one of the things that I do notice about radio, always keep your contacts because you never know who's going to appear where. And it was a producer that I remembered at Capital who was working at LBC. And I just said, look, my kids are now at that age. I dropped the little one off to nursery. I dropped the other one off to school. What have you got? And he said, well, look, every now and then, Sandy Toksvig has a guest. So I did just some contributing with Sandy Toksvig. And then one day she just said, listen, I'm going to be ill tomorrow. And I was like, well, go to the chemist. And she said, no, Angie, I'm going to be ill. I said, well, go to the doctor. And she said, Angie, do you want to do that show or not? And I was like, oh, right, yeah, great. So that started to build up my speech radio. And then I got a regular gig on LBC. And we were talking about people that inspired you. And my deputy headmistress rang up. And that was an amazing surprise. And she actually said on air, you know, all those years of sending you to detention, sending you here, sending you home, suspending you, and here you are. And it was just a lovely moment. Her name was Miss Phillips, beautiful lady.
What a lady. It's such a small world, and I mentioned that there's a lot of familiar faces to me, and I'm sure to you in the room today. I mentioned your name to my longtime colleague and talk show presenter at East Coast FM, Declan Meehan.
Declan Meehan.
And he said, oh, Angie from Accounts, Angie from Admin, she's lovely.
Oh my gosh.
You worked together in Capital.
In And the fact that I'm saying 19, that will tell you how long ago that it was. I remember Declan as a producer, a senior producer. At the time, I was in HR, so I dealt with the contracts and the leave. It's just amazing the people that you will get to know in radio. And I always say radio is family. We may not necessarily agree with each other. We might argue. We might think, no, he shouldn't be doing that. She shouldn't be doing that. But whatever it is that makes up radio, whether it is a social media post that complements what's on air, whether it is something from marketing, sponsorship, promotions, whether it is on air, we all want that common ground that comes out of the microphone. We all want it to sound good because radio, Dave, of course, we want to know that we've done really well. So it's really interesting how people have played a part in my life. So even though, I think I saw Declan in October, there was a Capital Radio reunion, you kind of forget that you haven't seen each other for 20 odd years and the conversation just starts because that passion, it's just always there.
And on the subject of, if we can say the Irish like to punch above our weight, there has been an Irish hand on the rudder of your career on more than one occasion.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking, firstly, the great Mark Story.
Mark Story, I owe him so much. When I was on Magic, I was doing nighttime radio. So, you know, ladies, at night, you know what I mean. And we talk nicely. And we don't raise our voices, and everything's so calm and so lovely. And Mark pulled me in one day and said, I think you should do Drive. And I said, I can't do Drive. Women don't do Drive. And he said, what the are you talking about? And there's something about when somebody gets radio. You know, there's people that work in industries, and I say this with love, they're not necessarily passionate about it and shouldn't be there. Mark Story belongs in radio. And if he says, you're going to do Drive, and you're going to become the most listened to drive time presenter in London, it's going to happen. He said, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm going to do an Irish accent. It's not very good.
Please do.
He said, I'll give you 4 jars. So I said, OK, Mark, we'll do it. And I got there in 3. And what I loved about Mark, because he is also someone else that I knew as a producer, and he knew me as a secretary in HR. He looked past the secretary. He didn't look at this girl that, you know, that used to type and used to sit down with people and say, so what's your problem today? He said, you're a presenter, you need to come off nighttime, you need to be on daytime, and you're going to be the most listened to drive presenter in London. And it happened. And I will always thank him for looking past the secretary, but more so for looking past the stereotypical female nighttime presenter. I will always thank him for that. Mark then moved on, and Liam Thompson came to Magic. Now, he was working here for Communicore at the time. My children were just coming up to teenage years. My eldest was just about to do her GCSEs, and I just said, listen, I need to be home. At the time, the Magic Drive show was 5 till 8, and I just said, by the time I get home, it's too much. Liam could have said, listen, girl, there's a lot of people that want this job, because let's not beat around the bush. Somebody wants your job. This is the radio industry. Somebody's waiting for you to get a sore throat or resign or whatever. Liam put me on daytime. Once again, I will be forever grateful, because he could have said, Ange, listen, I've just come from Ireland. My mission is to get this station back to #1. So listen, if you don't want the gig, go. He gave me afternoons. It was absolutely wonderful. And once again, I will be forever grateful to him for that.
And he'll be on this stage a little later. And once upon a time, he was my PD in Spin 1038 here in Dublin.
Okay.
And just to move on to the power
Yeah.
of the role of being a presenter, I remember Liam took us for a working lunch where he paid on the company credit card. I think it was Communicore at the time paid for it. The presenters were brought out, and we were asked between courses, in 5 words, lads, I want you to describe your role as a presenter. And I remember at the time I presented the mid-morning slot at work. And I thought, this is going to be good. I've got to think here. So I said, making people at work smile.
Okay.
I've nailed it. No one's going to beat
Okay.
this. Then Steve Kay comes along,
Okay.
who was still presenting that wonderful drive time show on Spin 100 years later. When I left, he said, best of luck to you, Dave. I'll remain on as the granddad. He's still doing an impressive job there.
There you go.
Steve did it as the master of the economy of words in less than 5 and said, on-air salesperson.
Absolutely.
Is that what we do? Was he right nearly 20 years ago, and is Steve Kay right today? Are we sellers of the brand, of ourselves, of the music, of whatever it is we're talking about?
Funnily enough, I was going to say definitely in commercial, but I think once you're behind the mic, you bring your personality to the table. Obviously, you are there for a reason, but you're also speaking, presenting, enthusing on behalf of the brand that you work for. And I think that needs to be remembered, and I think that's really important. So years ago, when I worked for Choice FM, it was London's first black radio station. It was all soul and reggae and Motown and R&B. That was the audience I was speaking to. I'm now a mother, so I speak to parents and I speak to kids. It's amazing how broad the audience of Smooth is. So I think it's important to stay connected with your audience, regardless of the time slot you're on and regardless of the brand that you work for, whether that be a 24 to 48, whether that be 15 to 24, stay connected with your audience.
Before you open the microphone, do you get a picture of the person you're speaking to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was really privileged at Magic. I did Mellow Magic, I did Drive, I did Afternoons. Mellow Magic, I used to have an image of people at night and what they were doing, whether it were students, whether it were people on a Friday night thinking, thank goodness, it's the weekend, I'm getting home, whether it was a Saturday night and you were just either going into the pub, falling out of the pub, whatever you're doing. Drive time now on Smooth, I think about kids coming out of school, I think about parents taking their kids to after-school clubs. I think about people working from home because since pandemic, I think working remotely, for some it's been a joy, for others maybe not so much, but I definitely think, right, it's 4 o'clock. What is somebody doing right now? What is he? It could be a lorry driver, it could be anybody, but I think about that person and why they've either stayed with Smooth or have switched to Smooth or haven't had the radio on at all, but have decided to put it on. And from that point of view, and I know James was saying, you know, radio's not necessarily a performance, and I do agree with him, but if someone's gonna stop their day to turn the radio on to listen to me, I need to be respectful of that. And I am very, very respectful of that, because, hey, radio, you know what I mean?
And JNLR for us, exactly.
Absolutely.
Paul Sylvester, who was here previously, of course, from Absolute Radio, he loves to talk about reluctant adults. And when you said falling out of the pub, you've reminded me of that. We're both reluctant adults, I think, at this point. The days of clubbing, and I think you were a lover and a raver of those days. Is it true you saw George Michael in one of the early day clubs?
Okay, so George Michael used to go to a school called Kingsbury High. I used to go to a school called Claremont. It was in Harrow. We used to get the bus, and I had friends that went to Kingsbury High. And we used to play the odd game of rounders. And I think he lived about 3-4 doors down from my dentist, who was in Row Green. And there was he just disappeared. He moved to Bushy. And one evening, phone rings, top of the pops. Here, Ange, there's that guy from Kingsbury High on the TV. And we're like, oh my gosh. But we always knew he had something in him. He was always going to make it. It wasn't, he liked music, but he enthused it. He was passionate about it, and he was a good dancer as well.
And as James mentioned, it is a privilege, and it's a very deep relationship that presenters have with that one listener we're thinking about all the time. Paul Sylvester said, I'm paraphrasing, we wake them up, we see them naked in the shower, we calm, in your case, their commutes.
Yeah.
We do all that.
Yeah.
And it's a privilege. It's a two-way street, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. I've always felt privileged to be on the radio. I felt that privilege infuse, and this might sound really crazy, during lockdown, because I felt that radio was the one medium that people just constantly connected to. If you think about people who started working from home, who had never worked from home before, you've got your kids at home, you've got your spouse at home, this has never, ever happened before. Turn the radio on, and we'll keep you company. And songs during lockdown sounded different as well. I can't tell you how many times I played Randy Crawford, You Might Need Somebody, but in lockdown, my goodness, that sounded different. Same song, but just sounded completely different.
When COVID hit, you know,
Yeah.
sort of March 2020, how did that immediately affect your day-to-day life?
Whew. Well, I wasn't sure how working from home was going to work, but thank goodness for technology, it did work. It was a bit strange at first, and then you kind of got used to it. And I quite liked it. But then there were times I missed being in a studio. I missed having conversations with friends. I missed doing the odd social media post, walking up and down the corridor. But then it kicked in that this is actually a mission. And you are privileged, Angela, because some people lost their jobs through COVID, lost their jobs through lockdown. But I kept going, and it was great. And you could be as passionate as you could be funny, because I think people needed a laugh at that time as well. So also, even though Smooth, still quite a, what I would call, well, we've changed our format now, but quite a calming station. I think people needed lifting up, and I think they needed a good laugh.
And reassuring.
And absolutely, that everything was going to be all right, yeah.
The power of music. What are you into yourself when it comes to music?
I love all music. I don't think you can be a music lover and only like one category of music. I grew up on reggae, soul and soca, but I love what I play on Smooth because radio-wise, that's also what I grew up on. So, you know, you turn the radio on and you would hear the Bee Gees, you would hear a bit of Tom Jones, you'd hear Elton John, you'd hear... So, and I love the mix of music, and I love the way that music speaks to you. You could be in a really bad mood, turn on a song, and all of a sudden everything just melts and goes away.
Tell me about the day you were in the first car you ever bought, and that one particular song from Roy Ayers came on. I think it was a pirate station at the time, yeah.
I had an orange Allegro. Yeah, okay. I was listening to a pirate station. It was a blazing hot sunny day. I think it's when Kiss was a pirate. And the song by Roy Ayers, Everybody Loves the Sunshine, came on. All right now. And the sun was shining. And even though I had that record in my collection, to hear it on air unexpectedly, I wasn't expecting to hear it, I just pulled over. I don't even know if it was on a yellow line, but I just had to savor it. It sounded beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
That encapsulates for me the power of it, really.
Oh my goodness, beautiful. And even though I'd seen Roy Ayers live, just hearing it, because I wasn't expecting, because it wasn't really a radio track, wasn't expecting to hear it, but that just, it made my day. It really made my day.
You referred to being a mammy, and clearly you adore your daughters. How do they react to Angie, their mom, Angie, the presenter? How do they, I suppose, influence what you do each day?
I mean, my youngest has just gone into performing arts, which I didn't push her into. It's just something she wanted to do. I can just remember once being out shopping with the girls, and we were out somewhere. Someone recognised my voice. Hi, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. And my youngest said, yeah, but you don't hear her at 7 o'clock when we don't get up in the morning. She don't sound like that. But, yeah, they embrace it. They love it. But what I do try to do is, well, I do switch off when I get home. But if we are out and, you know, someone says, hi, love you on Smooth, I try and move it on, because if I worked in Tesco, and there's nothing wrong working in Tesco, no one's going to stop you and say, oh, my goodness, you weighed 10 ounces of bananas for me the other day. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But that's also a joy about working in radio. And I do think, as much of a joy as it is, there's also a responsibility, because you're given this opportunity to play music, whether you like that music or not, whether you enthuse about that music. People choose to listen to you, whether they're driving, whether they're in the kitchen, whatever they're doing, they make a conscious choice to listen to you. So take that responsibility and embrace it and be passionate about it.
And on that, when it comes to strict formatted radio playlists, and be honest, do you ever get bored of it? And
Sometimes.
How do you stay excited for a job you love every day?
Find different things to say about the artist that you're playing, and share a bit of your life with your listener. So you don't always have to say, that was Lionel Richie all night long, and I love that album. Talk about what Lionel's doing. You know, he's got a home range out, and he's coming to the UK. And, you know, talk about the artist. Because through the music, a lot of listeners believe they know the artist anyway, especially if they've seen them live in concert. So talk about the artist. Talk about what they're doing. You know, social media also gives us an opportunity to engage with artists as well. And a lot of artists are happy to put their life out there. So I saw on Instagram the other day, Madonna, she was in, I think, Zambia or Kenya or, you know, talk about these things because there's only so many ways you can say that was Madonna Live to Tell. So, and the listener doesn't just want to hear that was Madonna Live to Tell. And I think when you've got listeners that engage with you, I'm not even sure that they hear every song you play. I think they want to hear things you've got to say anyway. So it's important to have a conversation with the listener and not just announce the music.
That was, this is.
Oh, yeah. God, that was, this is, the time is,
yeah.
My name is, you're listening to. No.
No, thank you.
No.
I have to ask, Maxine the Concrete Mixer.
Oh, my gosh.
BAFTA-nominated Jim Henson series. How did that happen?
Where did you find this?
I watched a few episodes this morning when I woke up and I thought, I can kind of see Angie in the face of this concrete mixer. And that's a compliment, by the way.
Thank you. Looking like a concrete mixer, okay. So one of the beautiful things about being in the voice industry is that you get voice work. Anyone here like doing a few voiceovers? Yeah, and it works and it's great. And I've done from endorsing products on ITV to doing documentaries on Sky, BBC. I was asked by my voiceover agent to do, they just said, can you sound gravelly? And I'm like, okay, fine. Literally. So I did this test for a concrete mixer from Jamaica called Maxine. And she was grinding up the gravel. And I said, okay, what is this for? And about a week later, I got a call saying that the Jim Henson Company, who made the Muppets, were making a show for CITV called Construction Site. And I was Maxine the Concrete Mixer. And it was fantastic. It was one of the best times of my career because that also makes you realise, all right, you do your radio show, but there's other things that come from it. And whilst I do speak like this when I'm on Smooth, I can also talk like this and get paid. That was, oh God, I loved that. Absolutely loved that. And Construction Site was nominated for a BAFTA.
And it's on YouTube, and I highly recommend it.
And it's on YouTube,
yeah.
Yes.
I'll finish, because I know we're tight for time, with a cliche, and you and I, over successive years and successive programme directors, I'm sure it has been drummed into you as much as it has to me. Yeah. Don't use cliches on air, Dave. Don't do it. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I mean that.
Thank
Angie
you.
Greaves, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.